Hello and welcome. My name is Thomas Kevin Dolan, and I am the writer and author of Little Fag, A Journey of Self-Acceptance and Healing. It is my memoir. And today I'm going to read chapter 10. The title of the chapter is, Why Did They Go to War? Begins on page 62 of my book. My parents spent 33 years hating each other before they finally decided to separate. Yet it wasn't for another 25 years that my dad would serve divorce papers to my mom. Scientists studying the physical nature of hate have found that some of the nervous circuits in the brain responsible for it are the same as those used during the feeling of romantic love, even though love and hate appear to be polar opposites. I was in junior high school when the second to last round of violence broke out at home in the wee hours of the morning. It's one of the reasons why loud noises still disturb me. Dad, in a drunken rage, was embroiled in an argument with Mom. My older brothers had assigned themselves to protect her. I could taste the fear, hatred, and disdain in the air. One of my brothers, perhaps more, would end up in a physical fight with Dad. I remember quivering in fear and making a vow to myself that in this lifetime, I would never hit or be hit by another human being. That vow stands today. It was Mom who would swing a fist at Dad. For the first time ever, she spoke these words, "You will never return to this home. We're finished." I recall the terror I felt on hearing those words and the relief. There was nowhere for me to hide and no one to talk to about how it made me feel. But for the very last time, the police car rounded the corner with no such ceremony, lights turned off, not a neighbor in sight. One of my brothers had Dad pinned to the ground. Mom was yelling at Dad, saying he had no right to be here, something about a restraining order. Two police officers emerged from the car, called out to my dad using his name, put handcuffs on him, and placed him under arrest. My father's shadow never darkened the door sill of that house again. What I braved. I can still see my keys hurtling across the width of our bedroom, gouging a hole in the drywall with their impact. My partner at the time gently said, "Didn't you vow never to be violent in your life?" We just had a major argument. That act terrified me. It also opened my eyes to what I had been taught about anger. Anger was never spoken. It was always acted out. Bodies flew through doors, hands through glass, and screams through windows. Never ever did I hear, "I'm angry with you." Instead, the message of anger was delivered through physical violence. I had plenty to be mad about growing up surrounded by alcoholic adults. Yet I was virtually powerless to stop the forms of abuse and neglect I suffered. I was not allowed to express my anger or outrage in a healthy manner. Instead, I acted it out by reacting inwardly and converting anger into shame, depression, and low self-esteem. The years of hard work it took to discover the depth of my wounds were staggering. I had no idea how to deal with anger responsibly, so it was a major block to my personal growth. I don't know how I avoided addictive and compulsive behaviors. Holding on to old anger caused me to avoid conflict, procrastinate, and give up my needs. It poisoned relationships and prevented true intimacy. It bred bitterness, resentment, mistrust, and fear. During a therapy session where I was brave enough to dive into my anger, my therapist told me that people who carry around a lot of resentment tend to be more reactive to day-to-day situations. I was a master in reactivity. Family members, former partners, and others became the recipients of my repressed, misplaced anger. It was always delivered in veiled, insidious, and sarcastic ways. I felt horrible acting out that way. I had no idea so much anger lurked within me. I remember delving into and discovering some of the reasons why I held so much anger. My heart was broken because I wanted to dance and sing. My entire family missed my birthday when I was in elementary school. No card, no cake, no present. I felt helpless in not being able to stop my dad when he beat my mom. Add to that experience of sexual assault and of having somebody in my family steal many of my cherished possessions, including my candle making equipment and my white hockey skates. For an elementary school age kid, these were valid gripes. But once I became an adult, by better understanding and acknowledging the presence of my anger, I could take steps to work through the anger and move beyond it to forgiveness and reconciliation. Being stuck in a cycle of resentment and bitterness was classic for most of my family. My anger was not sourced from my gripes, but also from the dysfunction of not having my feelings validated, and worse, being forced to deny them. All of my gay fantasies were wrapped up in cartoon versions of superheroes. They were my vanquishers of perceived injustice. Anger is the emotional response to perceived injustice. It was always a justice issue for me. My thinking or feeling I don't count, or my thoughts aren't important. What I braved was an important step for an adult child of an alcoholic. I made a choice to do the anger work and move towards forgiveness and self-forgiveness first. The biggest stage in this process was to understand the incidents that still trigger anger. That work continues today. I love the benefits that swirl around me because of learning to successfully deal with anger. The gifts include serenity, self-confidence, healthier relationships, and a sense of recovery from growing up with a parent who was alcoholic and the other parent who was the enabler. It's not a one-shot deal, but like the wisdom of the 12-step program, I take it one day at a time. The unlearning. My parents never gave me the dating talk. Gay wasn't one of the chapters in their How to Raise Your Kids book. I jokingly tell friends that my siblings, who were attracted to the opposite sex, received the talk, and nothing was ever said to me. My father once shared that his parents, my amazingly strong and loving grandparents, spent at least 4 years courting, and during that time never kissed. There was always something magical in hearing that story. I spent my elementary school years dodging being kissed by girls. I loved some of my female friends, but was never attracted to them physically. I remember wanting to kiss some of their brothers, though, but that never happened. During my life, I never saw mom and dad hug or be demonstrative. I thought of how painful it must have been for both of them to never have reached out to one another. Sure, 10 kids came through them, but that too felt like it might have been fraught with emotional pain for both of them. By denying the order Mom gave to never have anything to do with Dad or his family after she and Dad split, it felt good to have a relationship with him, especially because he never directly abused me. It never made sense to me that he was the bad guy. Intuitively, I always thought both of them messed up. His pain was greatest because of not having access to his kids. Most of my siblings obeyed Mom and never spent time with our father. He was so angry, she kept them away from him. Although he was alcoholic, it was challenging to have much compassion for his lack of connection to his kids. Not only had he beaten his wife, but he also subjected all of my older brothers to either being the protector of our mom or the enemy of our mom. He was responsible for driving them away. Yet something niggled at me to want to get to know this man. Wanting to be acknowledged was at the top of my needs list growing up. But as the 7th of 10 children, the novelty of another child from my parents had long since worn off. Add to that the dynamic during all of my school days that neither of my parents were present at any school functions. None. Despite what was missing, I was more interested in what might be available. In some way, whether small or large, I thought I must have some of the qualities of my dad. I was a top-notch sprinter in junior and senior high school, gathering many first-place ribbons. I would be at a track meet a year or so after Dad was legally restrained from returning home that he watched me run. I remember being too afraid to go and say hello. On top of that, there may have been friends of my family watching who I thought would tell Mom I broke a rule of no engagement with Dad. The allegiance to the dysfunction of Dolan's silence had won out. One day during school the following week, my name was called over the intercom. I remember hearing, "Would Tom Dolan please come to the principal's office?" It was a message many junior high schoolers were not fond of hearing. As I sheepishly approached the principal's secretary, she beamed with delight and said, "Here's a message from your dad. He wants you to call him." She handed me a pink slip with a phone number on it and my dad's name. Dad had never called me before. I suddenly remembered the message from Mom to all of her kids. There is no goddamn way you are to see your father. Whether I liked it or not, I was a pawn in their war. Knowing that I could never make a call to him from home, I chose to call him from a payphone. I did it during a lunch break at school. That way, no one would ever know. From the moment I heard his voice, the sober voice I longed most to hear, I realized it gave me comfort. I remember saying, "Hi, Dad, it's Tom." He quietly replied, "Son, thank you for calling. It's good to hear your voice." I remained still and didn't reply. He quickly filled the silence with, "You run like the wind." I was so impressed watching you win all those races. My heart filled with joy. Someone acknowledged the seventh son. He continued, "I have an idea. I was wondering if you'd let me buy you a pair of track shoes. I'm sure you'd shave seconds off your time running in a pair instead of regular runners." He went on to ask, "What do you think?" My mind flashed to thinking, but he's supposed to be the enemy. I wondered how it was possible he knew what I most wanted in the world, especially with the city finals and hopefully after that, the provincials coming up. "Son," I suddenly heard, "would that be okay with you?" It was a little strange to think of using the word dad when I was told inadvertently not to do so. "Dad, that would be great." He quickly replied, "Let's meet at the sports store on 5th Avenue this Thursday at noon. They have some of the best track spikes in the city." It was amazing to see my dad. His handshake felt reassuring, and his hug a blanket of love. We had never been paired as father and son, all on our own, ever before in my life. I left that rendezvous holding a brand new pair of baby blue Adidas track spikes. Yet more importantly, I left knowing I had been held by my dad. Running like the wind, as my dad had told me, was certainly something these shoes would help me through junior high school and on to senior high school track career. It felt so powerful to know that Dad was with me every sprint of the way. The unlearning for me was related to choosing not to go to war with Dad regardless of what Mom wanted. It wasn't my battle. I chose to no longer be collateral damage in a war not of my making. As I moved into university and track club, spikes became more sophisticated. The shoes Dad gifted to me needed to be retired. Mom never knew that he bought them for me. I had packed the shoes away and discovered one day, as I searched for them to give away, they'd gone missing. A few weeks later, as I opened a gift box for my birthday, I pulled out a single track shoe that had been bronzed. It was mounted like a plaque with an inscription that read, "You ran like the wind." Mom smiled and said, "I thought you'd love to keep it as a remembrance of your track days." It felt ironic to me, with both of them at war, that Mom would create a keepsake for me purchased by her sworn enemy and then inscribe it with his words. Oh my gosh. As I read the story, I remembered the feeling, and I had this fear in my stomach, even as I told you that I was afraid to go and see him at the track when he was there, because other people might see me go and say hi to my father. You don't get any wackier than that, huh? So I am so grateful for not listening to, that edict that my mother had put out to her children. Thou shalt not see your dad. I'm so proud not to have listened to that. I'm so proud I had a relationship with my father. He taught me a lot. And at his funeral, his side of the family, which I had no connection to at that time, would say to me, "Oh my God, you look so much like Uncle Jim." And of course, I had no idea that I bared that kind of resemblance to my dad. And it might have had me understand why perhaps it was really difficult for Mom to at times, love me the way she did, but also at the other side of the spectrum, that I reminded her so much of her husband. That might have been tough for her as well. So the relationship I had with my father, I'm really proud of. Right? He taught me a lot about myself. He allowed me to hear the version of his story. He allowed me to heal something in me that was really profound. And it was this notion of, right, allowing him to be who he was. Allowing myself to be listening to his stories, right? And lots of times the stories were told through the filter of, right, my drunk father. And that was uncomfortable. But for the most part, what I felt was important was to be an audience to his pain from time to time. And that would be counted with being an audience to his amazing stories, his ability to speak. He was a beautiful orator. Oftentimes people say to me, although not many, because my family, right, my siblings, they don't know my dad. But those that know my dad on my dad's side of the family often say, you speak so much like your dad. You look so much like your dad. You're handsome like your father. And of course I take a breath and with humility I thank them. So in this lifetime, I made a really great choice to get to know this man, my father, James Joseph Dolan, and to have no regret about doing that. To have no regret about doing that. Right, when my father did take his last breath, and that's a whole other story, one of the things that I recognized right away was that I was so proud to have spent the time I spent with him. And perhaps there might have been other siblings that didn't find the courage I found because they didn't want to break the rule that Mom had bestowed upon them. Maybe they regretted that they'd not had a relationship with him and that it was too late. He'd already taken his last breath. I don't live with that regret, which I'm so proud of. And it creates for me this sense of a confidence in knowing that I am my father's son.